So the purpose of this screencast is to reiterate the PLC goals that we do have between now and August, also to provide direction for the work that should be getting accomplished in PLTs to help meet those goals. So we have had some professional development in through faculty meetings as well as in block discussions, but we want to make sure that as a PLC, the work that we're accomplishing is really happening in those PLTs during that collaboration time. And then the third purpose is to extend just support to any PLT who may have questions. Again, your supervising administrator as well as anybody on the PLC design team can always help with any questions you may have. So here are today's learning targets. So I can identify the essential components of a learning log, student learning log, and that may be some new language that you haven't quite heard yet. You'll find out more about what that is as we go through this, as I'll go through this presentation. And then the second one, sorry, it says number one. I converted this from Google Slides to to PowerPoint. So the second one is I can use my knowledge of the real process to develop a student learning log for at least one unit in my course of focus. So just to connect back, we've been utilizing the 4 questions, essential questions of a professional learning community to guide our work. The first question is, what do we want students to learn or know and be able to do? So we've been looking at that since January and started that process with prioritizing standards and going through the real process. I'm sorry, that's my son. He's in the room right now. He's actually been doing a decent job, so I'm sorry you just heard that scream. Question number 2 is, how will we know if they've learned it? And that's really focusing and talking about common informative assessments and how we use assessment in an intentional way. So we'll start diving into that a little bit more in April. And then question 3 is, what will we do if they didn't learn it? So you get that information from the common assessments. And then question number 4 is, what will we do if they already know it? So again, like I said, we focused on question number 1 by having that PLC half day where we went through and prioritized our standards using the real process. So here are our revised goals, and I call these revised because there's a slight change that we made to the May goal. So we said by May 31st, or the end of the school year, we want all PLTs to have prioritized and unpacked standards into learning targets for at least one full semester. So right now that's semester 1 or semester 2. Originally it read semester 2, but we want to provide some flexibility for PLTs, as they said they felt it was more beneficial for them to start with semester 1 units to begin doing that priority standards because they had just completed it. Then by August, we'd like for all PLTs to have prioritized and unpacked standards into learning targets for every single unit. So looking across the entire school year, having your priority standards, unpacking those standards, understanding your learning targets for every single unit. And more specifically, the very first unit of study that we come back in August on the first day, we'd like to have every PLT know what is this first unit of study going to look like. So we want you to have a polished draft of that first unit of study, and the evidence of that is going to be the publication of what we're calling a student learning log or student learning tracker, as well as an assessment plan. And those may be 2 additional vocabulary words that you may not have heard at this point. So a polished draft, when we talk about that, we're really looking at a completed learning log and an assessment plan that includes the role of common formative assessment as well as common summative assessments throughout that unit. So we'll explain more about this as we proceed through this presentation as well as into the PLT work that we're going to accomplish by the end of the school year. All right, so again, just to give you to reiterate what we've done, this is an example of the Algebra 1 form that they developed when they went through the real process. So you see their standard is in the column far to the left. That second column to the left is the actual standard written out. And then next that is, it says topic. So the topic is kind of the unit in which they are teaching these standards. So here I've highlighted in red all the different topics that they have. In blue, you'll see that these are identifying everything, all the priority standards that are identified as being taught in topic 6. So again, I want to reiterate that the standards that you see listed are the priority standards that they have identified for Algebra 1. Those that are highlighted now in blue or have a box around them in blue, those are the priority standards that they're looking for in Unit 6 or Topic 6. So the next step after they identified, again, what are the standards for Topic 6? The next thing is to unpack all the standards that you said are priority standards. So step 1 says they're identifying that standard. That's the actual standard written out. Step 2 is describing the skills students are expected to do. Step 3 is recording the knowledge and concepts students are expected to know. So what we're doing now is we're taking that standard and we're unpacking it. We're looking at to say, what is the standard really saying and what is it requiring of students in order for them to meet proficiency? So after you unpack those standards, doing steps 1, 2, and 3, and 4, which is recording the prerequisite knowledge and skills that students need, you're turning those unpacked standards into learning targets. So just for this one standard, add, subtract, and multiply polynomials, and understand the polynomials follow the same general rules of arithmetic, though that standard is broken down into 3 different learning targets. So for every standard, you want to take that down to the learning targets that students need to be able to do in order to meet or master that standard. So this next topic is the learning log. The next slide is the learning log. And it's an example from the Algebra 1 team. So as you can see, this is topic 6, polynomials and quadratics. And they have all their learning targets for that unit listed on this learning log. Then they have dates that go across that identify when are these learning targets being addressed and focused on, and where are they developing evidence and pulling evidence to see if students have, to see where they are in terms of their learning with those particular learning targets. Also at the bottom you see that there is a goal sheet. So students will end up tracking where are they in terms of what they should know and be able to do. Can I actually classify polynomials by terms and degrees? Can I simplify a polynomial expression by adding, subtracting, and distributing? So when they receive feedback based on the evidence that they get on these dates where these targets are assessed, they'll develop goals for themselves. Maybe, and I'm not sure if they do this with algebra or not, or maybe the teachers will develop those goals with those students, or students will develop their own goals based on their particular learning needs. This is another example of a learning log. This is from the biology PLT. And this would be a good time just to pause this video and determine, what do you see in this learning log? What all does it include? So what I notice is that this is for their Unit 1 ecology, and they have 2 different targets for ecology, target A and target B, that they have listed on this particular learning log. What I also notice is for each target, we'll look at this one quadrant here. Target A is interactions in the biosphere. And then they have their 3 learning targets for target A. I can give examples of abiotic and biotic factors within an ecosystem. I can explain how various biotic and abiotic factors affect biodiversity of an ecosystem, so on and so forth. Another thing they also have is students' ability to rate where they are. So A stands for advanced, P stands for proficient, B stands for basic, BB stands for below basic. And these are 1, 2, and 3. That's the student's self-reflection. And this is what the self-reflection means. A 3 means I have mastered this target and can effectively teach it to another person. A 2 is I can explain skills in this target most of the time, but I still make mistakes and need practice in order to get better. And number 1 is I have difficulty with this target and need help to learn how to master the skills. Those are the things that I've noticed are on this learning target. They also have at the very bottom their snapshots. So snapshots serve as the evidence of when this target is being assessed. So it would have the name of the snapshot or the date that it was given. So snapshot 1, 2, and 3. One last thing that I noticed is that they've also listed the vocabulary that students will need to understand and utilize throughout this unit for target A, interactions in the biosphere. So these are all the different things that are on this one learning log for target for the Unit 1 ecology, target A. So you've heard me talking about learning logs and showed you a couple of examples of learning logs. So why learning logs? When we think about these learning logs or student learning trackers, we're really trying to get to a place where we're more learning focused. We're taking this learning focused approach and identifying here are the essential things kids need to know and be able to do. And here is how we're helping students become stewards of their own learning as well. We're intentional about what we're teaching. We're intentional about how we're assessing it, and then we're intentional about the feedback that we give, so students can create their own goals, their own learning goals, so they can track their learning toward mastery of the standards that we see are important. So again, as we transition to a more learning-focused approach, these learning logs or student learning trackers will provide a way to track student learning and provide targeted intervention to create assessment-capable learners. And those learning logs would be for both teachers and for students. So teachers can use it to identify where are kids in their own learning, and students use it to identify where am I in my own learning. So at this point, you saw two different learning laws that look very different. One thing about the Algebra 1 PLT, they're doing some standards reference grading. And one thing you didn't notice was their explanation or a scale of what basic, below basic, proficient means, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or anything like that. That's because they're actually posted on their physical classroom walls, and students also have copies of that in their handouts. It's a little bit different on the biology one. They did have advanced, proficient, basic, below basic, as well as a scale to identify a rubric to identify student self-reflection on what a 3, 2, and 1 meant. But as you see these two different examples of learning targets, we want PLTs to develop, learning law. We want PLTs to develop learning laws that make sense for them. We may end up getting to a point where we may try to find a way to systematize our student learning trackers or student learning logs in a way where students can have a very similar from class to class, no matter what class they're in. But at this point, we think it's most essential for PLTs to identify what works for us. So with that, we do want to have a couple of common things, our common components included on our learning log. So here are the essential components of a learning log. So you have to have your learning targets. So again, here are the learning targets for the ecology unit. You also have to have a student evaluation. So here are students evaluating themselves, their self-reflection. I've mastered this target and can effectively teach it to another person, 1, 2, 3, or 4. But with that scale that communicates student learning, you also have to have a way to rate that or to communicate that. So, i.e., below basic, basic, proficient, or advanced, if that's a language you want to use, or a 1, 2, 3, or 4, as long as students know what that means. Or you can use language that comes from some of the state level, which is far from proficient, nearing proficiency, proficient, or advanced. So options to enhance your learning target. So these are the essential components. The options to enhance it, you have univocabulary that you see over here. And then you can also decide and put on your student learning log how many times the PLT will formally assess each learning target. 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3. And then also a way to document the dates of the assessment. So here are the dates of the assessment. So what we want to do, our next steps are in your PLT, either this Thursday, March 27th, or April 3rd. We want you to go through and make sure that you have this work done. So you will receive a checkpoint document that says, where am I in this process of either priority standards and prioritizing those standards, developing learning targets for each priority standard, or are we in a process where we're now drafting our learning log or our tracker. So this is the work that we want you to accomplish in March 27th or April 3rd. We know this is ongoing, but begin to put an honest effort into developing a draft of a student learning log. So again, that student learning tracker should have a learning target, a self-assessment reflection, and then our future work, we're going to start looking at question number 2, assessments, because again, we said part of our May goal is to come back with your first unit of study that has a completed learning log as well as a polished draft of your assessment plan for that unit. So we're going to look at formative and summative assessment in our future work. So again, today's learning targets were to identify the essential components of a learning log. You can find that again back on previous slides. Then number 2 is I can use my knowledge of the real process to develop a student learning log for at least one unit in my course of study or course of focus. So again, that's the work that you're going to be doing in your PLT either this Thursday, March 27th, 8th or next Thursday, April 3rd.